like it to be eaten. If we leave it for the town hall staff, it will be gone in 5 minutes. So take what you want now. So I just want to thank you all for being here. It's a Friday at lunchtime, and this just is another exhibit for me of how Orleans has residents who care about the community, care about the longevity of the community and the viability long term. So you can give yourselves a round of applause, but the first thing I'd like to do is acknowledge that we have a gentleman here who's been serving the town for more than 20 years, who turned 93 today. Len Short is in the front row. Thank you, Len. I just be glad I didn't try to sing. So I also want to just acknowledge quickly a couple select board members who are present. Meph Runyon and Andrea Reed are in the room. I believe Michael Herman is on Zoom. And this presentation will be recorded and made available on the website so everybody can see it now and later. Just the fact that you've been working on a town warrant so hard in the last few weeks and have completed it, and you showed up for this meeting, suggests that you care about the future of the town more than many, so thank you very much. So this meeting is a workshop to talk about a new type of zoning that we hope will spur needed development in the town of Orleans. Orleans residents, over a long period of time, have exhibited an interest in making a more vibrant downtown, having more people live downtown, being able to get all the services and goods they need locally, or as many as we can, so that we have a vibrant and viable community long term. The comprehensive plan back in 2000 had a recommendation to do a village center master plan. Through a lot of work by the planning board and others, that culminated in the streetscape project and reconstruction on Main Street in about, I think it was 10 years ago now. So we have public sewer available in this district now, and now we're at the next step to look at the regulatory framework, primarily the zoning bylaw, but not just zoning, to see how can we encourage more housing downtown and more investment in the commercial sector so we have a healthy community. So I think that's all I want to say. I want to turn this over now to Assistant Planning Director Elizabeth Jenkins, who is heading up this effort and is working with UTIL architects and planners. So please, Elizabeth. The consultant's part.
Thank you so much, George. Again, I'm Elizabeth. I just want to echo thanks for being here. And I will let Tim, Courtney, and Lauren, they can introduce themselves as they come up. But such a pleasure to be working with this team. They've done a lot of work regionally and have had some amazing successes when it comes to revitalizing spaces through zoning. So this is our agenda today. Our consultant team is going to help us take a look at where we are today, and then we're going to open it up, do some discussion, question, and answer. So we have some tables and exercises, of course. So just building on what George just expressed, this project is well grounded in a foundation of excellent planning that Orleans has been doing for many, many years. There are a number of projects out there that speak to wanting to build a more vibrant, walkable place here in Orleans, somewhere that acts as a destination, both year-round for residents and for visitors who are coming and growing our seasonal economy. You know, as you guys know, I'm fairly new here. As I was going through these plans, I was really struck by a 2005 visioning exercise that the town did with Association to Preserve Cape Cod just 20 years ago very strongly reflects a lot of the, I think, images and the discussion that we're having today. So I think a large part of the conversation we're having now is if we've had this idea in place for 20 years, why aren't we seeing some of the goals and objectives that were in this plan accomplished? What do we need to be able to move forward? And I will point out that one of the key pieces in doing this is zoning and how we guide development. All of the recommendations that came out of that 20-year-old vision were based in conventional zoning. And we know that this conventional and traditional zoning has its limitations. It was designed, starting in the 40s and 50s across America to keep incompatible uses separate, focusing on, how far a building is from the street, how many units you can put on an acre. And it's not, now we have different, and we've seen it produce. We've seen it produce single-family homes, and we've seen it produce apartment blocks. That's what it was really good at doing. But now we're having this conversation again and again about these missing middle housing types, smaller increments of development that a lot of times traditional zoning just does not allow the flexibility for individuals to build. So sort of next iteration in our approach to development regulations was design guidelines. The planning board did an amazing job with this a few years back, and we have those in place. But now we're evolving this conversation and thinking about how we can look to municipalities across our region, across our state, across our country, and take an approach that emphasizes the form and design of development to guide our future. So what is a form-based code? How is it different than traditional zoning? I think personally the most important part is that it starts through a public process. It's rooted in that shared vision for a place, and finding that consensus amongst the public and the people who are going to make the investment in the place. Form-based code, I hear a lot of times people think that they worry that it's a pattern that gets repeated and repeated across a place. So it's very important that it's contextual, that it's calibrated to our local economic conditions and our aesthetics. It's positive. It's not about prohibiting things. It's about speaking to what we want. And again, it's a stronger focus on design. Not that there's not regulation on land use, but it is a stronger approach towards form over function. And again, it's not just about regulating development on individual lots. It's a focus on creating a cohesive place. And it requires a little bit more work up front. We have to put more thought right now into what we want to permit, and that allows an easier process on the back end for developers and investors. So why are we doing this now? Just to recap, that desire for smaller development in smaller increments. We have, a lot of single-family homes, but we know that a lot of people are looking to downsize. Strong market preference for walkable development. When we talk about our housing crisis, it's we're generally talking about affordability. Median home price here, sales price here in Orleans is about $1.3 million. Homeownership's just become unattainable in the current way that we build here, and while we know we want to be dedicated to meeting our housing needs, we also want to be thoughtful about it. We want to meet those housing needs in a planned way that is not going to change the essence and the character of Orleans and why people love it here. And we're really hoping that this tool gives us that character, or that control. So project goals, and again, quickly, because I'm going over time. So we got, I know some of you were there, we got a group of board committees and commission members together, led by our planning board. We got our housing committee and our energy and environment committee and our economic development committee to come in, really before we kicked this off with UTIL, and said, what are our aims here? What are we trying to accomplish? And again, reiterating those goals from past plans to create a vibrant, walkable place that mixes residents and visitors, that supports small business, that moves us towards a more pedestrian orientation, but doesn't give up that seaside charm. A focus on attainable housing and a strong mix of local businesses, but of course focusing on both immediate and long-term environmental health and resilience. We hear a lot of times that there is this lack of cohesion up and down Route 6A, both physically, I think, in the way visually, and also physically in the way we experience it. So creating a cohesive place, walkable districts that become a destination for downtown, and also sort of on our back end, our regulatory side, producing a clear process. So if you are a business or an investor in a property here in Orleans, that there is a streamlined and predictable process, that you know what the expectations are. So this is our timeline. Again, we have been working on this with UTIL and the planning board since about January. We're going to catch you guys all up here in a few minutes on all this work that we've done so far, and we'll close out with where we're going. So I think with this, I'll turn to Tim.
Great. Hi, my name is Tim Love. I'm one of the principals at UTIL, and I'm a zoning hobbyist, just so that you know. And it's something that our firm has gotten more and more involved with, I would say, over the last 6 or 7 years. And that's partly because zoning is very technical. You know, it tends to be true that when you dive into a zoning code, almost any place, only the planning director knows, like, where the rules are, and so that's one point. The other is that the people who work on zoning and dive into it are either attorneys, land use attorneys, or planners, or architects, and that alignment of disciplinary expertise needs to be right, because at the end of the day, most of what we see out there in terms of the built environment, if it's private property, was the result of people following the zoning regulations or negotiating for something more against a rule book that, in a way, whether it's explicit or not, has some biases built into it. Does that make sense? And so what you're going to see today is very technical, because we're going to dive into your existing zoning and maybe what some of the issues are with it. But it's also important that you understand a little bit the issues in the weeds, because when we come back in the second phase to propose alternatives, you're up to speed on, we're going to have a simpler code, we think, in the future, but that the specificity of the code, what tends to influence the built environment are the details in the code, and not the generalities, because those dimensional standards in a code tend to drive how big buildings are, where they are on the lot, and those kinds of things. So this is the study area that we focused on, that partly has to do, we're not going to cover the rationale for that much at all today, but it has to do with where a couple of sub-districts are today. But it also, I think, for George and Elizabeth, and some discussions with the planning board, constituted maybe what the center of town is. You can see it's centered on 6A, which has the 3 indicators on it. And then we have just a sampling of photographs reinforcing what George said, how much variety there is along that short stretch, from shopping centers with lots of parking in front, to more village character like buildings with the parking in the back, to the earlier 50s and 60s shopping centers where there's less parking in the front. And so we're going to talk about that. Courtney's going to go through a sampling of those properties in more detail. I think I got this in the right order. And Lauren is going to take your existing zoning out for a test drive. But wearing the hat of, we're the architects for the friendly, easy to get along with, but slightly rapacious developer that's trying to build as much development on the site as possible. Because that's how the market thinks, and that's how a zoning should be designed. Zoning should be designed to anticipate that most investors try to maximize their return on investment by building as much as possible. And so we had fun with that, and we're looking forward to showing you that. So that's the 2 parts we have today. But we're aiming for a medium level of detail. So if you think we're going into the weeds too much, just raise your hand and tell us to speed up. Okay?
Hi, everybody. I'm Courtney McCracken. I'm an architectural and urban designer here at UTIL, and I've been working alongside Lauren as one of the designers to get the project up to where it's at today. I tend to speak a little bit fast, so if I'm speaking too fast, please tell me to slow down and I will. So I'm going to walk you through the existing conditions first. So we started out with mapping Orleans before we really got into the street level analysis. So we started off with building age, and you can see through the variety of purple through the site, there's a couple of buildings that were built before 1900 and going up until the present day, which are the ones that are shown in the bright pink. But there's a vast variety of buildings that were built kind of around the post-World War II area up until 1980, which is, we're going to get into that in a little bit, but it tends to be the sites that we're going to be focusing on for the test fits currently. But you can see on the side for the images, the first image is what we think is the oldest building in Orleans, which was built in 1750. The second is in that sampling that I was talking about between 1940 and 1980, which was built in 1974. And one of the more recent buildings that we're showing at the bottom is the Chase Bank, which is built in 2006. We then also looked at lot size along 6A, which many range between the quarter acre to 1.5 acres, with the larger sites sandwiching both ends, so the Shaw's and the grocery store at the north end being the larger sites, but around 5 acres. And again, those are kind of sandwiching the site of Route 6A, which is our study area, and coming off of the highways. We then looked at right-of-way width, which is the distance between the edges of the parcels on either side of the road. So you can see towards the south side of Route 6A, the right-of-way width tends to be a little bit wider, which allows for the lanes to be quite wide. So the image at the bottom of the screen, I don't know, there we go, right there. There's quite a few lanes because the right-of-way width is a little bit wider. And as you get closer to the village center, the right-of-way tends to narrow a little bit, which gives it a bit more of a village center feel, which again is around right there. And as you go up, kind of where the 2 is located, it's probably around its most narrow where it starts to widen again towards the highway. We then looked at sidewalk width. And what we were able to see is that for the most part along 6A and Main Street, there tends to be only a sidewalk on one side of the street and not on 2 sides of the street. And sidewalks tend to be around 5 feet and also get a little bit more narrow than that. So that's something that we're hoping to tackle a little bit in this future zoning. We then also looked at pavement and impervious and pervious surfaces. And you can see just based on this map how much pavement is along Route 6A with the amount of parking that is currently in all of these sites, especially for the ones where they're kind of bigger box stores where the parking tends to be in front. And towards the center of Main Street and the intersection, they tend to get a little bit more towards the back of the site because of how the building ages are. We also looked at building height, which for the most part, anything along our study area is around 2 stories or less, with Hilltop Plaza being one of our examples of a 1-story commercial building, Land Ho, which is around the center of our study area, being 2.5 stories. And the third site at the north of the site, which we think might be the tallest in our study area, is considered 3 stories, even though it kind of appears to be more of a 2-story, with the 3-story only being in the middle of the building. But this is not uncommon to Orleans. So these are some historic photographs that show some taller buildings that are no longer existing on the site. So the first one, from our research, we think it existed between 1880 and 1939 before it was torn down, which is the former snow block, and the site currently houses small shops and a large parking lot, and this is currently along Main Street. The second, which we couldn't put a date on exactly, is where the existing site of the Santander Bank on Main Street is, but this is like a 2.5 residential building. And then the last is around taken between 1940 and 1950, or at least the photograph is taken then. And it's the Snow's Home and Garden on Main Street location, which is currently the corner where the mobile gas station is. I'll then walk through the existing character analysis, which we selected a bunch of sites for. I'm going to walk you through only a couple of them today. But we wanted to make sure that we had a vast variety, that we were looking at the land uses as well as the existing zoning, which is GB is general business, LB is limited business, and VC is the village center districts. And as we were selecting these sites, we wanted to make sure that we had a range of lot sizes, building forms, street character, building age, etc. So these were the 8 that we chose for now. I believe I'm going to walk you through 4, but we put them in order in terms of development that we felt kind of told the story of Orleans successfully. So the first one I'm going to walk you through quickly is the residential to commercial conversion, which we use the example of the Orleans Lobster Pound, which we believe is currently vacant or closed. What's important to note about this site is the location of the parking. It's not in front of the building, but it kind of sandwiches the building on the other 3 sides. So you drive in from one side or the other and kind of loop around with all of the parking surrounding it. It's also important to notice the building height and its proximity to the street, which kind of gives it a bit more of a village center feel, even if it's a little bit further from the village center zoning. This one, I believe, is kind of just located outside of it. The next one, in conjunction with the last one, so if I flip back and forth quickly, you can see the parking in the back and then the parking in the front. So this is, again, a little bit, it's creating a bit of a distance between the building and the street by having that parking there, so it doesn't have as much of a walkability to it. And these have, again, the exact same program in terms of it being a restaurant. And having that building be set back and the parking in the front is something that we're wanting to discuss a little bit further in our zoning. The next is an automotive-centered infrastructure, which, similar to the last one, has parking in the front, but this one, because it's automotive-centered with gas stations, you don't usually look at those towards the back. But in terms of the development of Orleans, having more automotive-centered infrastructure once cars became a little bit more prominent kind of adds up in terms of the story of how Orleans would have developed. The last one is multifamily residential with a central parking lot. So this is obviously very different than single family residential, but this is having the parking lot be in the center, so you can kind of see, where's the laser? How you would enter the site with this parking lot that you then spread out to enter each of the buildings along. And even the buildings that are closest to the street currently don't front the street, like the frontage faces onto the parking lot instead of onto Route 6A. So you're seeing the side of the buildings that are closest to the right of way. So our key takeaways from this is that commercial development is, of course, scattered along Route 6A without a cohesive and robust center. There's a lot of land that is currently dedicated towards commercial uses, but there's not a lot of mixed-use residential development. A lot of it is strictly commercial. Route 6A is currently auto-dominant with few sidewalks and large surface parking lots facing the road, which I was showing a little bit earlier in the maps, because, again, there's a lack of sidewalks, and they're usually only on one side of the road. New zoning presents an opportunity to create a better connected, walkable, and vibrant mixed-use corridor that establishes Orleans as a better destination. And allowing for increased height will help incentivize redevelopment where it's needed and can embrace the heritage of old Orleans with design standards and guidelines, much like the historic photographs that I showed you. And now I'm going to pass it over to Lauren.
Thank you, Courtney, and hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here with you today. I've been a project manager for this effort, but I've also been heavily involved in other zoning efforts as well, so I'm excited to dig deep into Orleans with you all. So I'm going to talk through a little bit of what we've heard from you all through the various means of engagement we've had so far. Maybe some of you have participated in the Polis survey that we had online. We also had a couple stakeholder meetings, so we're going to walk you through some of what we heard together. So the Polis survey had a pretty good degree of participation for the size of Orleans. I want to put that kind of in, everything's relative. Certainly 188 might seem small, but we thought relative to the population, this was a pretty good representation. And what's important to note is that what was cool about this survey is that we were able to hear all of your feedback, and the survey itself, the platform that we used, grouped or formed two major opinion groups from everything that we've heard. And so from those groups, what emerged was we found that Group B represented 72% of the participants that were engaged in the survey, and Group A represented 28%. And this is important to note just because it makes everything relative to the opinions that we're hearing, how many people leaned a certain way on an issue versus leaning the other way. And so that's what you're seeing. Let me just find the clicker here. On the slide here, statements with more agreement, as you can see, are clustered on this side of the graph. Statements on this side of the graph were a little bit more divisive, and I'll walk you through what exactly those were. And again, we were really pleased to see this was an active and engaged community. There were almost 11,000 votes that were cast on the statements, and people were submitting over 200 statements as well to be voted on. So now to dive into what some of those areas of more agreement and less agreement were. Most people were in agreement that new construction in the downtown area should require parking in the rear. This is a theme that you're going to hear a lot from us today. There are a lot of opinions around parking and where it should be placed, and that really impacts how you feel and experience Orleans, right? Where a statement that fell a little bit more in the middle was any new or repurposed development in the village center should be required to use the Cape Cod design vernacular. And now for a little bit more of a divisive statement at 27% agreement was, I'm worried that denser housing development will overwhelm downtown Orleans. So it seems like not that many folks agree with that one. And now to break down how each opinion group expressed their opinions. So Group A was our smaller opinion group with 49 participants. And generally, they wanted to see that parking is made more easy for them. That was something that was prioritized over walking and biking. This group felt that Orleans has limited resources. They're concerned that more housing will exacerbate issues around water use and full beach parking. So that is something that the algorithm of the Polis platform determines. It's this pretty cool, we weren't individually picking it, but it's kind of a smart software that looks through and is able to self-group how people are voting. So this is something that it's able to do in the end when we close the survey. It kind of analyzes all the statements and then groups people. Okay, some other things Group A participants felt is that there's too much emphasis on the biking experience, which may not be as relevant to elderly residents. And then now to move on to Group B, which is our larger group. And this group felt that they want to see a variety of housing options, including more affordable housing. They want to see that new developments in downtown Orleans are community-oriented and have public spaces that are accessible to all. They felt comfortable that taller buildings would contribute to a more vibrant village center, and they wanted to see better access between the rail trail and Orleans beaches. So several themes emerged from this survey. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'll touch on a couple just from each section. So around the environment, we heard some feedback that people wanted to see an improved quality and maintenance of public spaces. They wanted to see better access to natural assets around downtown Orleans. As far as economic development, we heard a lot about diversifying businesses. People were talking a lot about seeing specialty retail, emphasis on local as well, and that these places would provide for ample gathering spaces that would really create a unique Orleans identity. There were a few comments that were adamant about, we're not Chatham, we're not Provincetown. So I think finding the thing that makes Orleans unique was something that came up a lot. We also heard that there was support for seeing policies that would help new businesses and encourage new businesses to come. For housing, we heard a lot of interest in seeing an increased density as well as diversity of residential and mixed-use development. And we say mixed-use development, really what that means for us is that you've got retail on the ground level and that you've got housing on the levels above. So that's something we're going to be talking about today. We also heard a lot of interest in having more family and affordable housing options, as well as smaller market rate homes. As Elizabeth and others were mentioning, there's interest really in being able for others to downsize homes as well. So lots of motivations for having that kind of smaller scale of development. For transportation, we heard a lot about wanting more sidewalks, interest in making the downtown more walkable in general. And what that means also when we say more walkable is de-emphasizing parking in the front of the site so that we can start to focus more on pedestrians and walkability. For arts and culture, we heard a lot about catering more toward year-round residents and looking for ways to increase opportunities for socializing and lingering downtown. And then in this other category, we also heard a lot about ways to revitalize empty or dilapidated storefronts and in ways to bolster the tourist economy so that we can make sure we're sustaining current businesses while also creating room for more to come. In the stakeholder meetings, we had a great group of property owners, developers, and those in the design and development community. We asked a bunch of questions, but the ones that we have in bold here under each of these three categories of economic development, housing, and zoning were the ones that we focused on the most. And from those, we heard generally similar themes to what we were exploring or what we were hearing within the Polis survey. So again, interest for incentives for businesses to come build in downtown or relocate to downtown. People wanted to see less emphasis again on auto-oriented uses. We heard even about potentially just making those by special permit only. There was also interest in finding a way to have a central parking solution downtown, taking the burden off of providing onerous parking requirements for each individual development site. For housing, we heard a lot of ideas around where we could start to think about locating denser housing, and that's something certainly that we want to talk about with you all today one-on-one. And there were ideas around potential to cluster housing in nodes along certain streets and areas around downtown. As far as zoning goes, we heard clearly that there's a little bit of confusion or a lack of clarity around how one can convert commercial buildings to mixed use or to residential use. We also heard some feedback on the permitting process being slow or difficult to deal with. And we also heard a lot about that the parking requirements can be difficult for businesses. So now I'm going to walk through, and this is where things are going to get a bit technical, so please bear with me. I'm going to try and break it down as best as I can. But we're going to walk through 5 sites around downtown Orleans that we've selected to take your current zoning for a test drive. And the way that we developed those 5 sites, which we're going to call soft sites, which means we think these sites are likely to be redeveloped in the near or medium term, is we base them on 2 criteria. So this first criteria, which this map shows, is building age. And typically the period between post-World War II and the 1980s is kind of a sweet spot for potential for development, because development that was prior to World War II might have historic charm or character, that we would want to maintain, while development that's more recent within the past couple decades is too new to be redeveloped. So this 1940s to 1980s sweet spot works well for us, and those are the areas you can see in red on the map. We also considered something called floor area ratio. You're going to hear that term a couple times today, but in essence, what floor area ratio means is how much can you build on a site. It's measuring the density, which is measured by total building area divided by lot size. And so essentially what we're looking for is when you have a large lot size, but not a lot of building area on a site, that's considered a low FAR. So all of the sites that you see in red on this map are what we would call low FAR. They are underdeveloped, essentially. And so we took those 2 things together and overlaid them in order to pick 5 sites around Orleans that we thought maybe these could be considered juicy or ripe for redevelopment within the next 10 or so years. And so we looked at, and you can see these numbered along the map, Ted's Garage, number 1. Number 2 is the Orleans Shopping Center. Number 3 is Post Office Square. Number 4 is the current Cove Motel. And number 5 is a vacant lot, but we actually combined it with an adjacent Papagino's site. And these sites all represent different zoning districts that make up the downtown Orleans. So we'll walk you through how that plays out. So you can see now on this map, all the 5 that are highlighted are representative of the general business, limited business, and village center districts. And we'll walk you through a little bit what can happen by right. And when we say by right, that means it's kind of the easiest path to development. You don't have to negotiate anything through a special permit. And so by right, you can build up to 6 units, multifamily. You can also build detached 1 or 2 family. And there are certain commercial uses that you can build by right, but there are some prohibited uses that you cannot currently build, including amusement parks, drive-throughs, mini golf, etc. And then as far as the review thresholds and process for development in Orleans, whether you have a by right project, which I've just mentioned, or a special permit project, which would entail apartments larger than 7 units, lodging, and some other various commercial uses, you have to go through a site plan review and an architectural review in Orleans. And you can see on the top, those have different jurisdictions with their own separate committees. And they also have their own different timelines, which I've outlined on the bottom of the slide here. So within the first 30 days, the Architectural Review Committee will have a preliminary review, and they're really looking at character, distinguishing features, what's the scale, bulk, height, materials of the building, etc. Around that time, you'll also have a site plan review, and that's really looking at a site plan to determine, are you protecting natural features? Are you ensuring safe traffic circulation? Are you ensuring that the parking areas are screened? Around 60 days out, the Architectural Review Committee will come forth with a final plan review, as well as a report and recommendations. And if you have a special permit project, around 65 days out, so 2 months in, you'll have a public hearing. So you can see this is, these are just different timelines to follow and be aware of. And so when we look to creating new zoning recommendations, we're going to be wanting to recommend and think through how are ways that we can streamline and make this development process a little bit easier moving forward. I'm not going to go through all of these metrics, but we wanted to show you a little bit how the sausage is made, because all of these things, which we have under the umbrella of lot standards, building standards, and parking requirements, all shape how big you can build a building on a site, and also where can you place that building on the site. And that all impacts the look and feel and perception of what can be built in Orleans today. So some just general big things to keep your eyes on are when we say residential density, which is right here, that's really impacting how many homes can I build on a lot. And that differs whether you're doing a mixed use development or a residential use development. But the key thing to know is by right, you can only build 6, what we're calling dwelling units per lot. There are setback requirements, and what that means is how close can I build a building to the street, and how close can that building be to other buildings or to side or rear lot lines. There are also requirements for maximum building height. You can go a little bit taller to 42 feet if you're having a 3rd floor of housing, but otherwise you're limited to 30 feet, which is really more like 2 stories for commercial or standalone residential use. Some other things I'll note, and this is going to come up a lot, is there are a lot of parking requirements that must be considered. There's a minimum of 1 space per unit for residential use, and there's a minimum of 1 space for every 250 square feet of area for commercial use. And we're going to walk you through now what that means and what that looks like on each site. So this first site is Ted's Garage. It's one of our smaller sites. It was built in 1962. You can see that there's really not a lot on the site there right now. And this is considered, again, a very low FAR, just comparing the amount of development on the site to the lot size itself. So this is an example of if we were to take your current zoning today and apply it, thinking through, as Tim said, we're a rapacious developer. How much building can I build? What is the biggest thing I can put here? This is what you would get. And essentially, the biggest thing to note is what we're calling the primary limiting factor is the FAR. So the FAR, which is the density of how much building can I build here, is really the primary thing that's limiting this from being any bigger than what it is now. The other things to note about this particular test fit are it's very auto-oriented. And I think this is really going to be a pattern that you're going to hear us say a lot. This is all baked into the zoning between there's a wide driveway at 30 feet maximum. That's this number 1 here. There's nothing prohibiting the parking from being in the front of the lot. So that's why you end up having parking oriented along the sidewalks and facing the street. The other things that are shaping the building right now are this is a 3rd floor housing building, so this is mixed use. So you've got your retail on the ground floor. There's a certain amount of floor area that commercial area must take up, which is 30%. There are also things that are shaping how tall the building can be and what that roof pitch can be. So that's what's influencing the building form you're seeing here. So I'm going to move on to our second site, which is Orleans Shopping Center. Again, you can see how little development there is on the site relative to how large the lot is. This is right in the village center, so this is considered village center zoning. I'll walk you through how that's slightly different than the limited business and general business, but there are some things that are certainly similar and still in play, which is you still have your wide driveway. You also have very onerous commercial parking requirements, and that's really what we're calling the primary limiting factor here. So because we've got all this commercial development up front, that is requiring a parking space for every 250 square feet of space. And so that's why we've got all this parking back here, and that's limiting us from being able to add any more development than is what is shown on the screen right now. We also tested having a separate residential building on the site, so that's what you can see in yellow back here. And what we're calling secondary limiting factors here are residential density, so we can't have more than 6 units. And we also, another limiting factor is building height. We can't go taller than 30 feet for this commercial use here. So those are the main things preventing us from being able to build any more on this particular site. So next we're going to talk through Post Office Square. This is one of our larger sites. It's currently got also a low FAR of 0.23, and this was built around 1987 as well as 1960. So here we tried testing a couple different things. We still have our commercial development in the front of the site lining Main Street, but we tried also fitting in some residential development as an accessory use in the back. And again, as with the other site that preceded this one, it's really the commercial parking that's limiting how much development we can place on the site. And that's why we've really got this sea of parking kind of in the middle of the site here, as well as these wide driveways that are connecting you from Main Street inward to the site. So the zoning is telling us how wide those driveways can be, how far apart those driveways can be. It's also telling us, though, because this is a village center zoning, there are requirements for how that building faces the street, what that sidewalk area should be, as well as what planting requirements are needed within the parking lot in order to mitigate the amount of parking that's there. Next, we're going to go to the current Cove Motel site. This is also a pretty large site that was built in 1959. And what we're showing here is what would happen if you were to do only residential development on this site. And so again, we are limited to a total of 6 homes maximum. We tried showing this case as an example. We're limited to 6 single-family homes. There's certainly opportunity to increase the residential density, and that's something we would explore going forward, but this is what you're allowed today. And because you only have a minimum parking requirement of 1 space per unit, that's less of an issue here with the residential development. Our last site is the Papageno site and the vacant lot adjacent to it, and we're going to show you what it would look like if you were to combine that site and do a fully commercial building. And again, this is where you can see it's surrounded by parking on all sides, because this is all the parking that you would need in order to be able to fit this amount of commercial development on the site. So anytime we're doing this, it's kind of always a push and pull of how much building can I put and how much parking can I put? And they're in this kind of battle with one another. And that was always something that we were trying to reckon with as we were doing these test fits. But it's really the same thing, that the commercial parking is limiting how much building you can place on the site, followed by the building height, which is limiting how tall we can go. So that's what's constraining the amount of development you can place here. Another thing that I haven't mentioned just yet, but that is also a factor to consider, is there is a limit on how much impervious surface you can have, and that means asphalt, essentially, and pavement. And that's a good thing, because we don't want everything to be a parking lot. So that's another thing that we had to work in as we were doing these test fits. So now a couple key takeaways. These are all the 5 sites that we looked at. I think there's some overarching themes, which is, I think parking is reigning supreme right now, certainly for all of the commercial developments, as a constraint on how much development you can build on a site. So we know that those commercial parking requirements are onerous. We also know that, as we can experience in Orleans today, that parking is something that's really apparent from your experience as a pedestrian and even as a driver in Orleans, because it's up front and it's along the front lot line and it's experienced from the street. So that's something that you can see from these test fits as well. So we'd want to look at where can we change the location of parking to emphasize pedestrian use. Some other things to note, again, are just the residential density limitations are constricting how much how many residential units you can place, as well as the building height is another restriction on how much development we can build on a site. So we want to be able to take these issues and think through together with you, how can we make your zoning better in order to have outcomes that you want to see in Orleans that better support your vision for the future. This is an example of a process that we went through along Schinkpainter Road in Provincetown, which was recently passed, I think, Monday night. So we're very excited about that. And we're thinking to follow a very similar process here where we'll continue to come here and work with you to define a vision and goals for what you'd like to see in Orleans, and to be able to translate that vision then into zoning criteria and parameters so we can ensure that the zoning follows the built form that you want to see in Orleans. But essentially, it's that we're looking to address your critical housing needs by increasing density and diversity of residential mixed-use development. We want to promote vibrancy as well as a unique Orleans identity with pedestrian-oriented retail streets. We want to create safe, walkable streets with improved sidewalks and de-emphasize parking. And so those are all things that you can see are contributing to a more pedestrian-oriented urbanism like in the image on the screen. So I know I went over, but now is going to be a great opportunity for us to talk one-on-one with you all. So we invite you to get up out of your seats and make your way over to these tables. We have some fun exercises that we want to engage you in.
Hey, Bill, how are you? You're off the hook for the table, right? What's that? You're off the hook.